We all like to make fun of woke culture as if it's just a movement of a bunch of purple-haired freaks that will eventually die out. As if it's just a momentary blip that's causing all of the latest movies on Netflix to basically suck. But I have some bad news for you. Woke culture is much more dangerous than you realize. And if we don't get clear about what its true motives are and how we can fight it, it will completely destroy the things we hold most dear.
So I vowed to destroy the woke mind virus after that.
If Elon Musk has vowed to destroy the woke mind virus, then you can be sure this isn't child's play anymore. It's a serious problem. In this video, I'm going to arm you to the teeth so no one can ever tell you that you're sexist or racist or homophobic simply because you oppose woke culture. Because wokeism is a sick, anti-truth, and fundamentally anti-human ideology that is infiltrating and poisoning our youth, our universities, our corporations, and our government. Like a Trojan horse, a wolf in sheep's clothing, the woke mind virus has managed to invade our culture by manipulating our compassion and threatening us with the label of far-right bigots if we don't comply with their endless protocols of virtue signaling. Enough is enough, my friends. It's time we understood what the sinister aims of woke culture actually are and stopped apologizing for our Western values. We must reclaim the Judeo-Christian, Greco-Roman tradition that has birthed the Western world. We must reclaim the belief in reason, objective reality, individual choice, and most importantly, the belief in an objective moral order to the universe. If you're new here, my name is Roni, and on this channel, I dive deep into human nature to help us become everything we're meant to be by building authentic lives filled with meaning and connection. I sincerely hope that you join me down this rabbit hole because I promise you, you will come out stronger on the other side. First, I'm going to take you through the history of ideas that have brought us the 21st century monster child that is wokeism. This will help you understand the evolution of woke culture and how evil its legacy really is. Second, we'll take a look at woke ideology in its modern form and the means by which it has infiltrated our institutions through the infamous diversity, equity, and inclusion doctrine. This will help you identify when these ideas are being pushed and how to clearly stand up against them. Lastly, we'll go through the principles on which the West has been built. This step is crucial because it's not enough to be against something. We also need to have a clear understanding of the values we're fighting for. Before we dive into the history of wokeism, I just want to give you a little taste of the lies the woke movement is pushing down the throats of our youth. They're being taught that boys can be girls and that girls can be boys. They're being taught that gender is fluid and that there's no such thing as biological sex. They're being taught that our entire society is infected with systemic racism and that to say that you don't see color is in itself racist. They're being taught that white men have privilege, even if they're poor, and that it's time they were knocked down a peg. They're being taught to see people not as individuals, but only as their group identity, meaning white, black, brown, man, woman, trans, gay, lesbian, or straight, which they're now calling cisnormative. They're being taught that throughout history, women have been oppressed by men, and that the family structure is in itself oppressive and exploitative of women. They're being taught that in this new upside-down world, to play the victim is a badge of honor. They're being taught that the underdog is always in the right, no matter what. And they're being taught that capitalism is evil and greedy and that we have to smash the patriarchy by any means necessary. They're learning to hate the West and everything it stands for. This is serious, my friends. Now let's dive into the history. Simply put, we can trace wokeism all the way back to Marxism, and even before that to the French Revolution, which inspired much of Karl Marx's work. Let's start with Marxism. If we boil Marxism down into one idea, it would be this: all of history has been a class struggle between the oppressors and the oppressed. In 19th century terms, these are the bourgeoisie and proletariat, respectively. Marx thought that all of history has been the exploitation of the proletariat by the greedy capitalist class of the bourgeoisie. He believed that the ultimate solution to this would be the abolition of private property in order to achieve a classless, stateless society. Remember John Lennon's song, "Imagine there is no country, it isn't hard to do. Imagine no possession, I wonder if you can. No greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man." Needless to say, the hippie movement of the 60s was heavily inspired by the Marxist spirit. But back to Marx. Marx believed that capitalism was inherently greedy and exploitative, and that the means of production should be communal, and that private property should be abolished. The crucial point of Marx's philosophy was that he believed that achieving this communist utopian state required bloody revolution. He believed that not only should the working class revolt, but that a violent revolt was inevitable. In his own words, in depicting the most general phases of the development of the proletariat, we trace the more or less veiled civil war raging within existing society up to the point where that war breaks out into open revolution, and where the violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie lays the foundation for the sway of the proletariat. Let me repeat that. Civil war, open revolution, and violent overthrow. That is what Marxism is all about. Marxism has always been and always will be the doctrine of bloody revolution. And personally, I wouldn't trust anyone who tries to tell me different. You can be sure that that kind of person would be perfectly willing to sacrifice your life if it meant it would get them even a little bit closer to their fanatic utopia of equality of outcome. Just as a side note, Karl Marx was a degenerate who couldn't hold a job, lived off allowances from his family and then his friend and colleague Friedrich Engels, and during his university years, he drank and gambled away every penny he was given. Him and his wife Jenny were lavish spenders, even though they were living off of modest allowances by other people. Jenny had 7 children, but only 3 survived due to the impoverished state in which they lived. Needless to say, he is not a man to be idolized. Now on to socialism. Now, socialism can be taken in 2 ways. One is the lighter, less extreme version of Marxism. This is the version that prefers reform rather than a full-blown revolution. But there's a second interpretation, where socialism is the transitional phase from capitalism to communism. You can think of Marxism as the religion, socialism as the mechanism, and communism as the end goal.
It's crucial to think of Marxism more as a religious architecture that people believe in than as a economic theory that's being engaged in dispassionately. And as a religious theory, there's this old saying, it doesn't matter what the theory is, so I'll say it with socialism. It's not that socialism can fail, it's that people fail socialism, right? So the problem isn't socialism, it's that people weren't sufficiently awakened to what it means to be a socialist.
That wasn't real socialism.
That wasn't real socialism. No. And communism can never actually be tried because communism is the heaven state that you arrive at after enough socialism so that people actually finally fully get it. So it's like the magic state when everybody's fully awakened as a full-blown socialist.
The reformist camp of the late 19th, early 20th century, like Edward Bernstein, Jean de Ross, and Karl Kautsky, sincerely believed that socialist reform was possible through reason, education, trade unions, and democratic elections. But let me be clear, they were still Marxists, and perhaps these early socialists really believed that the Marxist vision could be realized through appealing to people's humanity. But let me tell you, my friends, the history of the 20th century has unequivocally proved otherwise. When people try to defend socialism, they often bring up examples of countries like Sweden, Denmark, Norway, or New Zealand. These countries do in fact have either universal health care or free education. But importantly, they are still capitalist countries. They still have market economies and the right to private enterprise. A capitalist economy with a few welfare policies does not a socialist country make. At most, we can describe them as social democracies. But real socialists believe that capitalism is exploitative and greedy, and that socialism is the more humane approach, and that people should be as equal as possible and share with one another. The socialists of the early 20th century predicted that capitalism will ultimately prove less productive, that with capitalism, the poor will inevitably get poorer, the rich will get richer, and that class conflict is just a matter of time. Now, what the socialists propose is the redistribution of wealth by the government towards greater equality of outcome. To redistribute this wealth, Socialists believe in increased government control, or in modern terms, big government, and they believe that the means of production should be nationalized, meaning owned by the state. You know what happened when agriculture was nationalized in Stalin's Soviet Union and in Mao's Great Leap Forward? Famine and bloodshed. In the Soviet Union, between the mass murder of the kulaks, who were the existing farmers, and those who simply died from starvation, the number of deaths ranged from 7 to 10 million. In Mao's Great Leap Forward, the estimation is anywhere from 15 to 45 million deaths. Socialism never works, and the communist utopia has never been reached. I don't trust people who say that communism hasn't been properly tried. It's been tried over and over again and has always led to hell on earth. In his book, Basic Economics, Thomas Sowell explains that these famines are an inevitable part of a socialist system in which the production of food is nationalized. In a country without property rights, or with the food being owned by the people, there was no given individual with sufficient incentives to ensure that this food did not spoil needlessly before it reached the consumers. Those who handled the food in transit were paid a salary, which was fixed independently of how well they did or did not safeguard the food. I recommend starting out with his book, A Conflict of Visions. For the true believers in the Marxist religion, socialism is only but one step towards the communist utopia. They believe that in this transitional phase, a socialist dictatorship of the proletariat is necessary, just for a while, just until we've collectivized everything and are all singing Kumbaya together. The problem is, dictators don't like to give away their power once they have it. And another major problem of socialism, and communism for that matter, is that these ideologies completely misunderstand human nature and incentive structures. They believe that people will be equally motivated to work for the common good as they would for personal gain. This has never been true and will never be true. If your hard work doesn't benefit you and your family directly, and if high taxes eat away at your earnings, and if there's no direct reward for working harder and more efficiently, then people just slack off. That might be an unpleasant truth, but the fact that it's unpleasant doesn't make it any less true. Societies that thrive take the givens of human nature into account. They don't try to bend and mold human nature into something it isn't. When you do that, reality always snaps back and slaps you in the face. Now moving on to the theoretical utopia of communism. In this la-la land of communism, the socialist dictatorship is supposed to wither away, giving way to a classless, stateless society. Private property is completely abolished, all means of production are communally owned, and the government is no longer needed when we're all holding hands and starving together. This idealized utopia has never been realized. It has always resulted in a fascist, totalitarian, poverty-stricken state and unimaginable violence. Let me tell you, when people get hungry and have nothing more to lose, they become murderous beyond belief. In his transformative book, The Gulag Archipelago, Alexander Solzhenitsyn uncovered the horrendous atrocities that took place in the Great Famine of the Soviet Union. He writes, "People became so desperate that they started eating human flesh. Some would wait for others to die, but there were also cases where starving men killed their weaker comrades to eat them." This is the legacy of communism. Don't let anyone fool you. All the predictions of the Marxists of the 19th and 20th century failed miserably. They thought that in the world wars, capitalist countries would fight over resources, allowing the communist nations to rise up and take power. They thought that with capitalism, the rich would get richer and the poor would get poorer. What actually happened in capitalist countries was that the rich did get richer, but so did the middle class, and poverty decreased dramatically. Needless to say, the reverse happened in communist countries. In the 1950s, there was an important turning point in the communist ideologies. The capitalist countries were thriving and were enjoying unprecedented prosperity. Meanwhile, in 1956, Khrushchev gave his secret speech, which was eventually leaked to the West, where he admitted and denounced the Great Purge carried out by Stalin in 1936 to 1938, where millions were accused of being enemies of the people and were executed. After the humiliating defeat of the communist countries and the prosperity of capitalist countries, Marxist intellectuals were no longer able to openly admit that they were in fact Marxists. In the 1960s, these Marxist, socialist, and communist ideas morphed into postmodernism and post-structuralism. Oh, where do I begin? This was essentially the far left's way of inflicting their Marxist-inspired ideologies into academia and the minds of our youth. There are a few differences between postmodernism and post-structuralism, but for our purposes today, I'm just going to bunch them together. If we were to summarize postmodernism and post-structuralism in 2 points, it would be this. Objective truth does not exist. All truth is subjective. And knowledge is seen as a form of power. And by controlling language and narratives, the powerful maintain control. Basically, what this means is that both postmodernism and post-structuralism reject the idea of one absolute truth and an objective reality. And they believe that meaning changes depending on who holds power and the particular context that you're in. They think that truth is always flexible and subjective. The truth can be understood in different ways depending on who's looking at it and from what angle. So nothing is really real, only constructed. There are a few thinkers who contributed to this monster of an ideology, like Lyotard, Derrida, and Michel Foucault. They all have their sins to answer for, but for now I'd like to focus on Foucault. The leftist intellectuals still to this day love to teach Foucault. They get off on his bullshit like nothing you've ever seen. It helps them feel all high and mighty while they distort reality to fit with their ridiculous theories. Essentially, Foucault espoused the idea that the truth is constructed by those who are in power, that all social relations and interactions involve an exercising of power. If that sounds similar to the oppressor versus oppressed narrative, that's because it is. In his book, Discipline and Punish, he writes this: "Power produces knowledge. Power and knowledge directly imply one another, that there is no power relation without the correlative constitution of a field of knowledge, nor any knowledge that does not presuppose and constitute at the same time power relations." If his wording sounds convoluted, that's because it is. What he's saying here is that knowledge and truth aren't real. There is no such thing as objective truth. All truth is subjective and socially constructed, and what ultimately gets called true is what those in power want to be true. Each society has its regime of truth, its general politics of truth. That is, the types of discourse which it accepts and makes function as true. The mechanisms and instances which enable one to distinguish true and false statements. The means by which each is sanctioned. The techniques and procedures accorded value in the acquisition of truth, and the status of those who are charged with saying what counts as true. Listen to the language here. Regime of truth, general politics of truth. The truth is essentially manipulated and disseminated by those who are charged with saying what counts as true. The consequence of this line of thinking is the warped belief that reality itself is imposed on us by those in power, that every human dynamic is predicated on power dynamics. And if that's not bad enough, Lyotard pushed a deep skepticism towards any grand meta-narratives. In the postmodern condition, he writes this: "Simplifying to the extreme, I define postmodern as incredulity toward meta-narratives." So there's no such thing as a unifying objective truth. The profound legacy of Western thought, like individual rights and liberal humanism, cannot be applied universally. All narratives and all knowledge are constructed by those in power. That's it. And we should have a bunch of conflicting mini-narratives in their place. Now, Derrida pushed the idea that all language is a subjective power game, and he introduced the method of analysis called deconstructionism. But honestly, I don't have the patience to get into his nonsense right now. His writings are really a labyrinth of obscure mumbo-jumbo. Now, this postmodern ideology undermines the very fabric of reality and introduces a relativism to the very concepts of truth and knowledge, which eventually leads to a moral relativism, which claims that there is no objective morality to the universe and that all morals are subjective. Who are we to criticize a religion that covers their women from head to toe, advocates for honor killings, and stones a woman to death if she does not comply? That's our silly Western morality. Who are we to judge? No, Just no. I want to summarize this with a little clip from a speech Helen Pluckrose gave on postmodernism. For any of you who don't know her, she was part of the trio responsible for the grievance studies, along with Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay, where they showed how they were able to publish completely nonsense scientific papers as long as they used woke ideology. They were able to publish a paper with the title "The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct" and human reactions to rape culture and queer performativity at the dog park. These guys are real academic badasses. Here's Helen's summary of postmodern thought.
There is no way of obtaining objective truth. Everything is culturally constructed. Society is dominated by systems of power and privilege that people just accept as common sense. These vary from culture to culture and subculture to subculture. None of them is right or superior to any other. The categories that we use to understand things like fact and fiction, reason and emotion, science and art, and male and female are false. They operate in the service of power, need to be examined, broken down, and complicated. Language is immensely powerful, and it is used to construct oppressive social realities. Therefore, it must be regarded with suspicion and scrutinised to find the discourses of power. The intention of the speaker is no more authoritative than the interpretation of the hearer. The idea of the autonomous individual is a myth. The individual is also a construct of culture, programmed by his or her place in relation to power. The idea of a universal human nature is also a myth. It is constructed by what powerful forces deem to be the right way to be. Therefore, it is white, Western, masculine, and heterosexual. These are some core ideas of postmodernism which have survived.
Postmodernism is the poison that crept into Western academia through the back door and made way for the woke mind virus. Before we get into wokeism proper, I'd like to go through the critical Marxist theories that really set the stage and have blended together into woke culture. These are critical race theory, post-colonialism, radical feminism, and queer theory. These ideologies are the pillars of modern wokeism. They're each predicated on the idea that the world is made up of oppressors and the oppressed. The world is seen through the lens of those who are in power, exploiting the weak. Anyone who's successful has reached that state only by exploiting and marginalizing the less fortunate. While Marxism focused on different classes, like the bourgeoisie and proletariat, these newer ideologies replace class with other minority groups. Critical race theory focuses on white supremacy over people of color. Post-colonialism focused on the colonizers and the colonized. Radical feminism focuses on sexism and men's exploitation of women. And queer theory focuses on how heterosexuals oppress the LGBTQ community. Queer theory does go one step deeper than that, but we'll get to that in a moment. First of all, I'd like to emphasize that all of these theories are grievance ideologies based on victimization. These are the ideologies that have seeped into our education systems, universities, corporations, and government, and have created the foundation for modern woke culture. These are the ideologies on which DI programs are built. I'd like to go through the highlights of each because it'll help you understand how we got into this mess in the first place and how pernicious these ideologies really are. If we're not careful, they have the potential to completely erode the values upon which the West has been built. Let's start with critical race theory. This ideology claims that racism is systemic and that people of color are oppressed by white people. It calls for the deconstruction of white supremacy, which it views as the dominant structure of power in Western society. It calls for raising awareness or consciousness of how racial minorities are systemically oppressed. It calls for activism to change the power structures that maintain racial inequalities. It claims that white people should check their privilege. It claims that to say you are colorblind or that you don't judge people based on race is in itself a racist claim, because you're not acknowledging the racial inequalities that minorities experience. And perhaps the craziest of its claims is the idea that we need to abolish whiteness. Does that sound similar to the abolition of private property? That's because it is. In his paper, Whiteness and the Return of the Black Body, George Yancey, one of the proponents of critical race theory, puts it this way: a challenge must be waged not only against white supremacists and wealthy whites who animate whitely ways of being in the world, but also against ordinary whites who live their lives benefiting from white power in mundane, often unnoticed ways. This is the ideology that is fueling the complete abandonment of the white working class in America today. The problem with the critical race theory agenda is that it never ends. There is always more progress to be made, more whiteness to abolish, and more racism and white supremacy that needs to be checked and dismantled. You can hear this echoed in Robin DiAngelo's writing from her infamous book, White Fragility. Interrupting the forces of racism is ongoing, lifelong work, because the forces conditioning us into racist frameworks are always at play. Our learning will never be finished, yet our simplistic definition of racism as intentional acts of racial discrimination committed by immoral individuals engenders a confidence that we are not part of the problem and that our learning is thus complete. So even if you think you're not racist anymore, you still are. Even if you think our society has been able to integrate and unify people of various ethnic and cultural backgrounds under the banner of the American dream, you're wrong. Our society is still racist, and there's more work to be done to abolish white supremacy. This thinking is what sent us into a regressive state, fueling the hostility and animosity in minority communities that we see today. Even though we had a Black president, we're still racist. Now let's talk about radical feminism. Radical feminism is the idea that throughout history, men have oppressed women, that men have exploited women sexually and created a society that keeps women in their place and benefits men. This system of oppression is called the patriarchy. Radical feminists believe that we must smash the patriarchy. They believe that one of the mechanisms by which men have exploited and oppressed women is through traditional gender roles and through marriage and the family structure. Let me repeat that. They believe that marriage and the family are oppressive and exploitative of women. They want to completely dismantle the social structures that have provided people with stability, connection, and well-being. The social structures that have provided children with a healthy environment in which they can grow and develop into healthy, functioning adults. Yes, there are problems and unhealthy dynamics in many families. Yes, there are marriages that can become emotionally or physically abusive, but this doesn't mean that the idea of marriage or family should be dismantled. The family structure has allowed Western civilization to prosper and has unified communities. The interlocking of men and women through marriage has allowed male energy to be redirected from sexual competition to productive cooperation with other men. And without the family structure, people become fragmented, social bonds erode, children are left uncared for, and society inevitably suffers. Perhaps the worst part of radical feminism is the hateful animosity it creates between men and women. Women become antagonistic and suspicious of men, believing that traditional gender roles will oppress them and that perfect equality must be maintained. It creates frustration and conflict when the children come and women are confronted with the reality of breastfeeding and the care of infants. It creates a hostility towards men that causes many men to react with their own suspicion of women. The red pill movement is simply a reactionary backlash to radical feminism. Needless to say, I am not a feminist. I believe that the average man is good, that marriage and family are what give life meaning, and that love within a relationship needs to be maintained and nurtured. Radical feminism has poisoned whole generations of women and inflicted the label of toxic masculinity on whole generations of men. Enough is enough, my friends. Now, a quick look at post-colonialism. Let's take a look at how James Lindsay describes post-colonialism in a killer speech he gave to the EU Parliament.
What about post-colonial theory, which is plaguing Europe, thanks to Frantz Fanon and his biggest European fan, Jean-Paul Sartre? What about this? Well, it's the same. You have the West as the oppressor. They have access to the material and cultural wealth of the world because they've decided their culture is the default and have gone and colonized the world to bring culture to the world, as they say. And so the oppressed, the natives around the world, the people have to band together, and their activity is going to be called decolonization. They have to remove every aspect of Western culture. So when they come to Belgium or they come to France or they come to the United States and they say we're going to decolonize the curriculum, or they go to the UK and say we're going to decolonize Shakespeare, this is what they mean. We're going to remove the cultural significance of your cultural artifacts because those cultural artifacts themselves are oppressive to us. This is the same system. It's another species in the exact same genus, and that genus is Marxism.
Now, as Lindsay was saying, Post-colonialism is more prominent in European countries who were historically colonizers and countries of the global south who were colonized. While imperialism definitely had its dark side, the idea of post-colonialism doesn't just criticize the legacy of imperialist colonizers. It seeks to undermine everything that's Western. In post-colonialism, the idea is that the West has imposed its values, culture, and ways of governance on the rest of the world. And if we believe the premise of postmodern relativism, then who are we to say that there's anything better about Western culture than any other culture? And because of that, it pushes for the decolonization of all Western knowledge, culture, art, literature, and history. Everything that has made the West great needs to be decolonized or deconstructed, to borrow a term from Derrida. And the indigenous values and systems need to be restored, although the third world is desperate to immigrate to Western countries. Now, post-colonialism also reached American campuses under the banner of multiculturalism and diversity. In their book, The Diversity Myth, David Sachs and Peter Thiel describe their time at Stanford and how these decolonizing ideas were being pushed. Here is Peter Thiel's explanation.
But I suppose I would start by agreeing that a great part of this debate turns on how a lot of the issues are framed. It is, in many ways, a debate over a variety of words. Words like political correctness, like multiculturalism, like diversity, and what these things actually mean. And so I want to, instead of talking about political correctness in my opening, I'd like to just say a few things about multiculturalism and diversity. And I think the most critical point I want to make to you today is that these are euphemisms. Let's start with multiculturalism. Multiculturalism has next to nothing to do with the study of other cultures. I will repeat it. If there's a single thing I'd like you to take with you today, it is that multiculturalism has next to nothing to do with the study of other cultures. That may be a worthwhile thing to do in an increasingly global world, but that's not what it is about. You do not see students protesting on college campuses demanding missionary postings in third world countries to learn more about other societies. You do not have protests demanding more rigorous foreign language requirements where people will protest to learn Chinese or Swahili or Russian or anything of that sort. Again, it has nothing to do with other cultures. The same, I think, is true of diversity. This is another one of these incredibly misleading euphemistic terms. It does not, to put it charitably, have much to do with a diversity of ideas. You do not have real diversity on a college campus when you have a campus full of people who look different but think alike. And again, I think this is very, very important as a starting point in framing the issue. Well, the question then becomes, well, what are these things really about? What is multiculturalism really about? And I will suggest to you that the single most important theme that runs through much that goes under the rubric of multicultural is that it is anti-Western. It is not non-Western. It is still focused very much on our own society, but it is primarily a vehicle for denouncing it. At Stanford University, which is the one I'm the most familiar with, but I think is certainly no exception to the rule, the debate over multiculturalism in the late 80s started with a protest. The protest was against Western culture. The notorious chant was, hey, hey, ho, ho, Western culture's gotta go. It was not a demand for inclusion, it was a demand for exclusion. Now, why does Western culture have to go? What is the problem with multiculturalism? And what problem does it have? The basic problem, the basic claim is the West is uniquely bad because it is racist, it is sexist, it is oppressive in a variety of other ways. And not only does it have all these problems, but it has them in a way that is far worse than other societies. That's where I think things get very, very problematic.
And lastly, we have queer theory. Queer theory may sound innocent, as if it's simply advocating for gay rights, but it's far deeper and more sinister than that. Now let me make this clear right out of the gate. I am not homophobic in any way, shape, or form. I could care less what people do in the privacy of their own bedroom, and I firmly believe in people being able to build a life with the person they love. Now, historically, gays have been persecuted in very severe ways throughout history. While ancient Rome and Greece were perfectly fine with a bit of fun between soldiers, the Judeo-Christian and Muslim world that followed was much less keen on such behavior. Till this day, homosexuals will be stoned to death or thrown off buildings in many Muslim countries, for all of you queers for Palestine out there. But even in Great Britain in 1952, Alan Turing, the inventor of the computer and the man who helped Britain decode the German Enigma, was tried and convicted of gross indecency. He had the choice of imprisonment or chemical castration. This next clip is of Benedict Cumberbatch and Keira Knightley in the movie The Imitation Game about Turing.
Sorry.
I would have come. I would have testified.
And what would you have said? That I wasn't a homosexual?
Yeah, Alan, this is serious. They could send you to jail.
Damn it.
Your hands, you're twitching.
No, I'm not.
Alan.
It's the medication.
The medication?
Well, the judge gave me a choice. Either 2 years in prison or hormonal therapy.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
Yes, that's right. Chemical castration to cure me of my homosexual predilections.
He chose sterilization, but these drugs made him sick and confused, and he eventually committed suicide 2 years later. This is but one of many tragic stories. But with that said, queer theory is not really about advocating for gay rights. Its name suggests that it's all about protecting the LGBTQ community from historical oppression. But the real claim of queer theory is this: everyone who's considered normal oppresses those who aren't considered normal. James Lindsay explained it best.
But what about, say, queer theory? How is that Marxist? It's very strange, all this gender and sex and sexuality. Well, Tom said, what does woke attack? The idea of being normal. Well, the queer theory thinks that there are certain people who get to set the norms of society. They are privileged. They call themselves normal. They say this is normal. It's normal to consider yourself a man and look like a man and act like a man and dress like a man and eat meat like a man. And then there are women that should be feminine and pretty and all these things. And so they get to define what's normal. They're heterosexuals, so they get to define the heterosexuality as normal and other sexualities are abnormal. And so you have a conflict across this cultural property of who gets to be considered normal and who is a pervert or a freak or some other term that gets used in their literature. But technically, who is a queer, which sounds like a slur, but they adopted it and it's a technical academic term now. It means an identity without an essence, by the way, an identity that is strictly oppositional to the concept of the normal, as defined by queer theorist David Halperin in his 1995 book, Saint Foucault, Toward a Gay Hagiography. I didn't make that up. I'm not extrapolating. So you see, queer theory is just another species of the genus of Marxism.
This is the same ideology that is behind this bizarre trend of normalizing pedos that we've been seeing recently, as if it's a completely normal predilection and that such people are oppressed and shamed for their completely justifiable abuse of children. It's evil, it's toxic, and it is predicated on the ideas of oppressor versus oppressed, moral relativism, and a subversion of Western principles. I hope that this run-through has given you a better picture of where all this craziness is coming from and how we got ourselves into this mess in the first place. Now, let's get into wokeism in its modern form. Woke culture is everywhere. It's invaded every facet of Western culture. It's being pushed down our throats with DEI programs and with woke propaganda in movies and TV. It's in schools, universities, corporations, and government.
We have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke. And you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke. Yeah.
Woke culture is the ideological foundation that fueled the Black Lives Matter riots. Because don't forget, wokeism is just 21st century Marxism, and Marxism has always been about bloody revolution in destroying the upper class by any means necessary. Wokeism is what makes it legitimate for toddlers and preschoolers to be exposed to drag queen story hour, unbelievably inappropriate sexual content, and an endless slew of trans and gender fluid ideology.
All you need to do is you just stand with your feet sort of shoulder width apart, like so. Okay, and I'll show you at the side so you get a better view that way. And you crouch down into this sort of position here, so your bum's sticking out. Hope you're taking this all in. And then you just move your bum up and down like that, and that's twerking.
Movies like James Bond, which have a killer tradition of sexy, attractive, masculine men who always have the coolest gadgets, the coolest cars, and the most beautiful women, which male viewers and myself absolutely love to see have been hijacked by woke propaganda. In the last 007 film, a black woman agent was introduced who will be taking over the next movie. Why? Why not create a new movie with a super cool black female secret agent saving the world? We would love to see that. But the theme of James Bond has always been masculine, badass men who are intelligent, always one step ahead, who have beautiful women throwing themselves at them and the latest technological inventions at their disposal. It's a movie about the coolest man for men. Why take over the James Bond legacy and completely ruin the franchise? Hollywood is so woke right now that they don't even mind throwing billions of dollars on these movies, which just create antagonism and make people not want to watch. Another example is True Detective. I absolutely loved the first season. Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson were an incredible duo, and they gave an unbelievable performance.
You wonder ever you're a bad man?
The world needs bad men. We keep the other bad men from the door.
This was also one of McConaughey's first hardcore performances after the string of romantic comedies he had been in, and where he really showed his talent as an actor. I tried watching season 4 recently, and honestly, I couldn't get past the first 10 minutes. The episode starts with a white man as a wife beater, an old lady as the hero who hit him back, and an African-American female cop who effortlessly put him in his place. Take a look.
Let's go. Sir.
Fucker's not gonna die. He's just too drunk to get up.
Sir.
I told you, he's just too wasted.
Did you hit this man, ma'am?
Asshole hit Blair. Then I hit the asshole.
With a metal bucket?
What's your name, hun? Who's your akka?
Did you or did you not hit this man with a metal bucket, ma'am?
Damn right I hit him with a metal bucket. You putting me away for that, hun?
Hell yeah. I mean...
Sir, I'd like to speak with these women now.
Have you fucking dodged?
Now, sir. All right. What's the story here? He hits me, I moved out, he didn't like it.
She moved in with me, mind you, not with some guy.
Did he?
No, that's just a job. Playing with sharp things after a first or second shift on some other job will get you chopped.
Fuck, bitch! You broke my fucking nose! Hey!
Miss, are you pressing charges?
What?
Damn right she is.
Sir, you're under arrest for assault and battery.
The fucking bitch hit me. Fuck you two, fucking bitch pig. Ah, fuck!
I can't talk right now.
Not you on the phone? You on the fucking phone?
Also, those dimple piercings that are just painful to look at are also inspired by queer theory, where things that are considered not normal are pushed in your face even if it makes you uncomfortable. A similar thing happened in the Star Wars Last Jedi movie. I'll just say, Daisy Ridley was absolutely phenomenal, in my opinion, and it's not that we're saying that women should never be cast into lead roles, but the problem with The Last Jedi was that all the evil characters were white men and were called the Supremacy. They weren't even subtle with their white supremacy reference. And the Resistance was all a diverse collection of men and women where the women consistently emasculated the men and no man was white. And for my last example, I give you Snow White, where the entire story was decolonized and changed in order to fit the social justice feminist narrative.
Disney has gotten plenty of backlash recently because of Rachel Zegler taking on the role of Snow White when she's Latina, and for changing the story to make it look more feminist and empowering, all while changing incredibly important details of the original story, which is what made Snow White what it was. According to Rachel Zegler, the movie has removed all traces of romance between her and the prince, and she's even teased that the prince might as well be removed from the story in what some fans believe to be an incredibly disrespectful interview.
Prince or a different kind of prince? We have a different approach to what I'm sure a lot of people will assume is a love story just because like we cast a guy in the movie, Andrew Burnap, great dude. It's one of those things that I think everyone's going to have their assumptions about what it's actually going to be, but it's really not about the love story at all, which is really, really wonderful. And whether or not she finds love along the way is anybody's guess until 2024. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut, who knows?
And fans especially hate her because of the way she's been making it sound like the original Snow White story was horrible. And because she thinks that this new version, that almost doesn't even sound like Snow White, is the only right way to tell the story. Disney has not only completely changed the 7 dwarfs that are literally in the original title, but they also removed the prince's importance by seemingly not having him and Snow White fall in love. And not only that, but the studio has also been getting a lot of backlash for casting a Latina actress as Snow White, when the original character was named for her skin as white as snow. This connection is now impossible to draw in this new movie, and her name no longer makes any sense because of the choice to make Snow White Latina.
These movies may seem harmless, but they are completely shaping the way the younger generation views the world. The messaging that they're getting is that all white men are evil, that women are always good and better than men, that women don't need men and relationships are overrated, and that most people are either gay, trans, or gender fluid. Now let's talk about DEI, because this is exactly the mechanism that enables the woke ideology to become institutionalized throughout academia, education, government, and the corporate world. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It sounds harmless, and that's the point. It appeals to people's compassion and makes them drop their guard while they're being invaded by a Marxist Trojan horse. One of the major problems with woke language is that it uses words that seem innocent but mean completely different things within the woke framework. Now let's take diversity, for example. Diversity used to mean bringing together people of different opinions, perspectives, and expertise. This kind of interdisciplinary approach, where people who specialize in different fields come together, oftentimes does result in breakthroughs and innovation. The diversity that is being pushed today, however, means having representatives of every minority group, but who all hold the exact same woke beliefs. These are the diversity hires that are appointed in universities, school boards, and corporations. The tragedy of this is not only that you get a like-minded, politically correct mob policing the culture within an organization, but the fact that hiring people based on color undermines meritocracy. The Western world was built on meritocracy, as opposed to nepotism, which runs rampant in other cultures. Instead of hiring the most skilled and competent people for the job, DEI committees make sure to fill their quotas of minority group hires, even at the expense of someone who is more qualified. The consequence is that industry and the economy crumble. If you have unqualified people doing work they're not capable of doing, everything stagnates. The same thing happened in the Soviet Union, where the kulaks, who were the skilled farmers, were slaughtered, and the people who took their place didn't know how to properly grow crops. If you want to read a play-by-play of how a society can crumble this way, I highly recommend Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged. Now on to equity. Equity does not mean equality of opportunity, which is what we have in America and most Western countries. Equity means equality of outcome, which is a fundamentally Marxist idea. Equity is predicated on the idea that wealth, power, and resources should be redistributed to the less advantaged in order to arrive at a perfect, equitable, communist society where everyone is completely equal. This ideology is so dangerous because when you try to manipulate the system to achieve equality of outcome, you don't make the poor richer. You just make everybody poor. The example I always like to give is that equality of outcome doesn't lift a poor immigrant to the level of Elon Musk. It just drops Elon Musk to the level of the poor immigrant, which completely destroys any possibility for innovation and prosperity. The problem with this ideology is that it completely ignores an important fact of human nature. People are unfortunately not equal. One person is taller, one shorter. One smarter, one dumber, one more beautiful, one not so much. One has charisma, the other social anxiety. One is great at math, the other in writing. One is an intellectual, the other knows how to work with his hands, and so on and so on. People are not born the same. We can't change that. The most we can do is take what God or nature has given us and do our absolute best to develop it and put it into good use. That's it. But trying to make everyone equal by some artificial manipulation always ends in disaster. always. And lastly, inclusion. Another innocent sounding word. Let's just be inclusive and include everyone. The problem with this is, in some settings, you need a little bit of exclusion. You need to include the people who are competent and qualified and exclude those who aren't. For instance, having untrained, physically unfit, short women in the Secret Service probably isn't the best idea.
After Secret Service Barbie, a highly trained member of the Secret Service, removes her weapon from its holster for the very first time in her career. She struggles to return her pea shooter as though it's her first day on the job. Fortuitously, her skills from a previous life as an amateur actress come into play, allowing her to convincingly mimic the swift draw of the weapon and scan the horizon for threats. Chewing her gum nonchalantly, she attempts to exude a tactical demeanor, reminiscent of a fusion between the Blues Brothers and Rosie O'Donnell. Despite her efforts, our agent's attempt to return her wireless hole punch to its home results in another failure. While she may have faltered at this most basic of tasks, she certainly looked cool while doing it.
This idea that everyone should be included everywhere just doesn't work in real life and is yet another tool to undermine meritocracy and competence. When you include unqualified people into a group, it brings the entire group down. And really, inclusion today is just a way to bring in people who agree with the woke narrative and exclude anyone who's perceived as white, upper class, or privileged, all under the guise of caring for and protecting marginalized groups. And lastly, inclusion under the DEI framework means inclusion based on group identity, not individuality. This way of thinking manipulates us to see people only through a lens of their race, gender, or sexual orientation, rather than their character. True progress that has been made in the unification of American society has been replaced by a new form of racism and emphasis on race and color. It has sowed animosity and division between cultural and ethnic groups, teaching them to feel victimized and oppressed by the country they have the absolute privilege to be citizens of. And that really is tragic. Let's move on to our Western legacy. What I like to do here is to help frame the Western legacy for you, not only to help you understand our tradition, but also to show you what's at risk if we let the woke mob have their way. The Western tradition, roughly sketched, has been built on the following foundations: Judeo-Christian ethics, Greek rationalism, Roman law and governance, Renaissance humanism, the Enlightenment, capitalism, and free markets. Now let's quickly dive into each of these. Judeo-Christian ethics, stretching from the Bible to the New Testament, have been the beating heart of Western morality and law. This is where the West has gotten the values of human dignity, justice, compassion, and moral responsibility. Greek rationalism, which we associate today with philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, is what helped the Western mind develop logic, reason, critical thinking, and fruitful debate. This is the birth of the Socratic dialogue and deductive reasoning. This is when the pursuit of truth became a value unto itself. Now, Roman law and governance heavily inspired Western political systems, which any legal scholar could testify to. While we already had the budding of the democratic system from the Greek tradition and the idea of ethical and just law from the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Romans gave us the idea of codified laws, the concept of citizenship, the republic, and civic duty. This was the birthplace of ideas like checks and balances, senates, popular assemblies, property rights, and legal contracts, which make up the backbone of Western governance. After a period of the Middle Ages, which was characterized by a relative regression in Western values into mysticism and totalitarianism by the Church, we had the Renaissance. Many scholars refer to this time more specifically as Renaissance humanism, because not only were the classic traditions of Greece and Rome revivified during this time, but also the human was firmly placed at the center. The Western world became infused with the idea of human potential. During this time, we can see a huge emphasis being put on human achievements in art, science, and literature. This is the time of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, and Botticelli. This is when the value of beauty and culture took center stage. This is when the printing press was invented. This was the first budding of the notion that the individual has the right and capacity to develop himself, his knowledge, and to achieve great things. The Enlightenment, otherwise known as the Age of Reason or the Scientific Revolution, set much of the tone for our modern world today. This was the age that gave us the scientific method and empiricism as a form of inquiry and a way of expanding our understanding of the world. This was the source of classic liberalism, the idea of autonomy, individual liberty, and a healthy skepticism towards authority. This was the time of secularism, where church and state were separated. This is the time of many of the most influential philosophers and thinkers that have shaped the modern mind. From John Locke, David Hume, Baruch Spinoza, and Immanuel Kant, to Thomas Hobbes, Adam Smith, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. This was the time the Declaration of Independence, the American Constitution, and the Bill of Rights were written. And lastly, we have the birth of capitalism and free markets, which no matter how much Marxist, postmodern, woke professors try to tell you otherwise, capitalism is what has pulled millions out of abject poverty and has allowed us to enjoy unprecedented prosperity and convenience. In capitalism, we have the right to private property. In capitalism, we can participate in voluntary exchange within self-regulating free markets based on competition and supply and demand. Here we have the notion of minimal government intervention in market dynamics and price setting. Adam Smith, Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, and Thomas Sowell are only some of the great thinkers and economists that advocated for these principles and helped to solidify them into an economic system. This, my friends, is the beautiful, unbelievable, miraculous legacy of the Western world, which isn't nearly discussed enough. Instead, the younger generation are being taught to hate Western culture. They are being taught that capitalism is greedy and exploitative. They are being taught that to strive and to achieve is selfish. They are being taught that to build a family and have children is an act of violence against our planet. They are being taught that objective truth does not exist, and that all truth is a subjective language game based on power. They are being taught that words are violence, and that free speech is just a way for bigots to dish out hate speech. They are being taught that the state should provide them with all they need. They are being taught that to strive for beauty in art, culture, and even in your personal life is an oppressive insult to everyone else. They are being taught that all religious teachings and ethics are outdated, dogmatic, and simply a way to exercise power. They are being taught that the entire Western legacy is worth dispensing with altogether because it was created by a bunch of old white men. This is tragic, and it has to stop. But the only way to do this is by teaching the young generation about the legacy of Western thought. Opposing woke culture in the moment in a reactionary way isn't going to be enough. We need to remind them of the foundations upon which the Western world has been built. Otherwise, the bloody Marxists will get to them. And if we let that keep happening, then heaven help us. Over 60 years ago, Ayn Rand warned about the Western world falling prey to the ideologies of communism. Take a look.
Gentlemen, unknown to you today was a painful feeling of incredulity. To me, it is incredible that I should be speaking in the heart of New York, the greatest city in the world, to a group of distinguished American businessmen over so magnificent a product of American technology as a television set on such a topic as capitalism versus communism, as if any comparison, issue, or choice between them were conceivable. On the one hand, we have the record of the greatest achievements and the remnants of the noblest system ever created in the history of man. On the other hand, we have a bloody slaughterhouse of ragged savages ruled by a blustering anthropoid, inflated by our handouts, our land lease, our atomic secrets, our concessions, our compromises, our self-betrayal. The world is being destroyed by a terrible conflict, but it is not the conflict of capitalism versus communism. It is the conflict of capitalism versus itself, with communism as the profiteer and the scavenger among the ruins, who is advancing and winning by default. Capitalism is in the process of committing suicide, and if we want to stop that process, we must understand its reasons. No political economic system in history had proved its value so eloquently or had benefited mankind so greatly as capitalism, and none has ever been attacked so savagely and blindly.
This problem isn't new. Marxist woke intellectuals have been attacking capitalism as a greedy, inhumane system for centuries, and the younger generation have come to learn that anytime they try to strive upward, they are taking part in the evil capitalist machine. Jordan Peterson describes this perfectly.
Incoming freshmen next year, University of Toronto, Stanford University, 18-year-old kids coming into this. We've been through 3 years of COVID. I won't rehearse it all. One sentence. What would you say to them as they begin university at the age of 18 or 19? What's the restorative, the redemptive sentence? What should they do?
Don't be thinking your ambition is corrupt. You know, because that's part of the message now. Human beings, we're a cancer on the planet. We're headed for an environmental apocalypse. The entire historical structure is nothing but atrocity, et cetera, et cetera. Anyone with any ethical aim whatsoever is just going to pull back. You don't want to manifest any ambition, support the patriarchal structure, exploit the environment. You've got to crush yourself down. You shouldn't even have any children. It's like, no. There's no excuse for that. There's zero excuse for that.
If you're unaware to the extent of the woke brainwashing that university students are going through, I'd like to give you another example, along with a killer response from Camille Paglia.
I respectfully disagree with a lot of things you've said, but as a student, I think I'm going to raise some concerns about what you said about the university. I think in this debate, we've conflated two very different things, mollycoddling versus raising genuine concerns about structural gender and racial injustice in college and university campuses. I think what you call Generation Snowflake is a generation that recognizes diversity in the classroom and is more sensitive to the various kinds of injustices that students from all over the world come with. I'm from University of Oxford. I've been a participant in the Rhodes Must Fall movement. I think it's a convenient liberal argument to make for free speech by saying that, you know, just get over your problems. And what you said about spending time in the library and making education a personal enterprise, I think it's very easy to individualize these things from a position of privilege. But I think we should address greater concerns about very deep-rooted racial and gender injustices in our curriculum in the universities. Let's not trivialize very important concepts like safe spaces and trigger warnings, because it's easy to pick up, you know, small instances from schoolrooms and, you know, destroy the whole concept of having safe spaces in the universities. But they do address some very genuine concerns about bringing more equality, equity, and diversity to the classrooms.
Okay, so to use the phrase diversity, okay, and believe that this is the way diversity will be achieved, okay, through this privileging of authority, of surveillance, okay, from above, okay. I just simply disagree. I believe true diversity is achieved through a genuine multiculturalism, which I've been arguing for 25 years, would be based on the study of world religions in the classroom. I believe that is the true diversity, is to authentically study the other culture, not through this enforced diversity and again, a Victorian kind of a discourse with all kinds of circumlocutions to avoid giving offense. Right? So again, I simply disagree with what you've said. I'm sorry.
The younger generation need to learn that because of the immense blessing they have been given by being born into the Western world, it is their absolute duty to become everything they're meant to be. And that can only be done if they're given a positive vision moving forward. But it's not too late. If we learn to recognize the manipulation of woke language, propaganda, and DEI programs for what they really are, we can stop the bleeding. If we allow ourselves to be authentic, to speak our mind, and to not let the woke bullies silence us, then we have a chance of restoring the legacy of Western culture. And then, who knows what humanity can achieve? I hope this deep dive into the history of the woke ideology has helped give you a holistic understanding of why we are where we are today. And hopefully, this new understanding will give you the wherewithal and the confidence to stand up against it. It's time to start embracing and advocating for the Western tradition. Instead of the woke guilt that's being shoved at us, We can instead replace that with a strong sense of gratitude towards the West and a personal commitment to live up to its legacy. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with your thoughts. I love hearing your takes on these ideas, so please don't be shy. Till next time.